Snowfall takes place in Los Angeles in 1983, at the beginning of the white powder epidemic. The series follows several characters involved in different aspects of the illegal substance trade. An ambitious young street dealer, a CIA agent, and a Mexican wrestler with ties to the network. This season lays the foundation for a knockout empire that will transform the city and its residents forever. Franklin Saint, a 19-year-old black man, lives in the south-central neighborhood of Los Angeles. Smart and ambitious, he works in a store but dreams of more. He sees his friends making quick money on the streets, but he wants to take a different path, a path that leads to the top. He already sells a little illegal substance for his uncle Jerome, a former neighborhood boss, but he wants to emancipate himself. Franklin is also influenced by his childhood friend Melody, whose father is a respected former police officer in the neighborhood. CIA agent Teddy McDonald is desperate. He wants to secretly support the Contras, an anti-communist rebellion in Nicaragua, but his superiors refuse to fund his plan. To circumvent the rules, Teddy decides to partner with a white powder dealer to finance his covert operations. He assumes the identity of a deceased agent and plunges into the underground world of the substance. Gustavo El Oso Zapata, the wrestler trained against his will. Gustavo, a Mexican wrestler, is approached by Lucia Villanueva, daughter of a Mexican white powder baron. She wants to free herself from her father's influence and create her own network. She offers Gustavo a role as a transporter in a major powder operation. Gustavo hesitates but accepts. He is an upright man, but driven by poverty and loyalty to Lucia. Franklin discovers a contact with an Israeli middleman named Avi Drexler. He sells white powder wholesale. Franklin knows nothing about it, but wants to seize this opportunity. He manages to get a hold of a kilo of white powder, which he decides to sell on the street to try something new. But things get complicated. One of Franklin's friends dies from excessive consumption of the white powder, the customers are unpredictable, and the pressure mounts. Meanwhile, Teddy begins negotiating with middlemen in Latin America to smuggle shipments of the white powder in exchange for dangerous tools. Franklin now has Avi's kilo of white powder, but he has no network to sell it. He asks his uncle Jerome for help, who refuses to get involved in the powder trade. Jerome sees the powder as a threat to the black community, far more dangerous than the other banned substance. Franklin then decides to act alone. He tests the powder on the street, but realizes that few people know how to use it. He accidentally learns of the existence of the other substance, a smokable form of the white powder that's more addictive, more accessible, and more profitable. He enlists the help of his friend Leon and another neighborhood friend Kevin to create the banned substance from the white powder. They learn how to manufacture this revolutionary product without even imagining the consequences. Teddy, now undercover, gets rid of a corrupt agent and sets up a laboratory in a hidden warehouse. He works with Alejandro, a former Nicaraguan military officer. Together, they begin smuggling the white powder from Latin America to the United States. For them, the powder is a way to finance a just war. But things take a turn for the worse when Teddy discovers that Logain, his predecessor, died under strange circumstances. He begins to suspect that this mission will go far beyond what he imagined. For his part, Gustavo agrees to make a delivery for Lucia. He transports a kilo of the white powder on behalf of the network, but the transaction goes wrong. Men attack them. Gustavo manages to escape but is shocked by the violence. Lucia reveals to him that she is in conflict with her uncle Ramiro, the boss of the network. She wants to overthrow him and seize power. She is using Gustavo as a pawn in a much bigger game. Gustavo, although inexperienced, begins to get his hands dirty. Franklin and his friends test their substance in the neighborhoods. It is a resounding success. Users become addicted after a single try. The money rolls in. Franklin realizes he's onto something revolutionary. He becomes a young local baron, admired and feared. But this also attracts attention, especially from Claudia, an influential local woman who runs a club and manages her own distribution network. She sees Franklin as a rival or a future partner. Franklin begins to live in excess. He has money, girls, a car, but his mother, Sissy, is worried. She doesn't know where all this money comes from. Franklin lies to her, claiming to have found a better-paying job. Jerome also begins to question himself. He suspects his nephew is involved in shady dealings. Despite his warnings, Franklin plunges deeper into trafficking, blinded by his rapid success. Teddy and Alejandro continue their plan. They buy a plane to transport the white powder more easily. But the pressure mounts. The CIA is watching from afar, the Nicaraguan networks are unstable, and Teddy begins to doubt his own morality. He also discovers that Logan was assassinated because he wanted to stop everything. The CIA is prepared to do anything to carry out its operations. Teddy understands he is alone and in danger. Gustavo discovers the betrayal. Gustavo realizes that Lucia is manipulating everyone. She uses violence to take control of the network. Gustavo is torn between his loyalty to her and his own conscience. He eliminates a man for the first time. The shock is intense. Lucia promises him that once in power, they will be rich and free. Gustavo agrees to continue, but a part of him begins to fade. He becomes a criminal, out of necessity, but also out of love. Franklin begins to feel the effects of his rise. His friend Leon is increasingly violent with customers. Kevin is losing patience, and demand for the white powder explodes. But with success comes violence. A deal goes wrong, and Franklin is attacked and robbed. Seriously injured, he is left half-naked in an alley. It's the first time he understands the true brutality of the street. He returns to his mother's house, humiliated and traumatized. Sissy then discovers the extent of his injuries and begins to understand that her son is involved in illegal activities. Franklin wants revenge, but his uncle Jerome explains that he needs to think like a businessman, not a thug. Franklin begins to change. He becomes colder, more strategic, more dangerous. Teddy continues to transport white powder with Alejandro, but the CIA begins to ask questions. He realizes he must be even more discreet. They use a plane to bring in gunpowder from Mexico, then redistribute it through contacts in Los Angeles. But a flight goes wrong. A shipment is lost. Teddy must cover up the incident, disguise the reports, and maintain Alejandro's trust. He falls into a spiral of lies and paranoia as he begins to understand that he has become involved in an uncontrollable spiral. Gustavo and the network war Lucia continues her power grab. She suggests that Gustavo form a new network, independent of his uncle Ramiro. Gustavo, increasingly involved, begins to eliminate people to protect their interests. He becomes Lucia's silent enforcer, but he is haunted by what he is becoming. In a moment of doubt, he returns home and finds his family incomprehensible to his new way of life. He hides his double-mindedness behind a heavy silence. Lucia, however, develops a taste for power. She plans to eliminate her uncle. Chaos enters the party. July 4th arrives. Franklin decides to make a splash. He throws a huge neighborhood party to showcase his new status. Everyone is there, including Claudia, Melody, and even the police are watching from a distance. The party is tense. Kevin, jealous of Franklin's power, begins to rebel. Melody grows closer to Franklin, but she begins to understand the dark side of his activities. Franklin tries to maintain a clean image, but things turn sour when a rival network arrives armed. A shootout breaks out. Franklin and his friends barely escape, but the event marks a turning point. The street no longer respects Franklin as a simple, ambitious young man, but as a network leader. He begins to lose control of his troops. Lucia organizes a spectacular stunt. She traps her uncle Ramiro with false information. Gustavo is tasked with carrying out the attack. A shootout breaks out in a villa. Ramiro is shot, and Lucia takes control of the family network, but things don't go as planned. Gustavo is seriously injured. Lucia saves him, but members of the network are after them. Now on the run, they must rebuild their empire with their own resources. Lucia becomes colder, more strategic. She's ready for anything. Franklin, after the July 4th shooting, decides to professionalize his business. He wants to create a real organization. He meets Claudia, the club owner, and offers her a partnership. He supplies her with the white powder, and she helps him distribute it within select and wealthy circles. Claudia accepts, but imposes her own rules. Franklin learns to play with the codes of power and money. He changes his look, adopts a more commercial language, and becomes a true businessman. But at each step, he sacrifices